Welcome to episode 96, Lifting LGBTQIA Voices of Color, Racism Among Gender and Sexual Minorities, featuring Dr. Frank Sanchez, Luna Malbroux, MS, and Jazzmun Crayton. By Clearly Clinical, learn, grow, shine. Hello to our listeners. Today, I am honored to be spending time with three individuals that are here to shed some light on the intersectionality between racism, discrimination, and the LGBTQIA community. In no particular order, I would really like to introduce to you Dr. Frank Sanchez. Dr. Sanchez is a licensed clinical psychologist who works as a vice president of clinical compliance at the Holman Group. And he also has a private practice in Porter Ranch in Valencia, California. I would also like to introduce to you Jazzmun Crayton. She is the Senior Manager of Strategic Partnerships at the Asian Pacific AIDS Intervention Team in Los Angeles and a board member of the City of Los Angeles Transgender Advisory Council. I want to add in a quick post-production disclaimer. We had difficulty during the recording with Jazzmun's microphone, so you might notice that the audio quality is lower than the other two guests. Thank you for your grace and patience. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Luna Malbroux. She has her master's in social work and facilitates education and training on cultural humility, anti-racism, equity, and implicit bias to organizations and communities. Thank you to the three of you for being here today. So I would like to first ask you to tell us a little bit more about yourself. Luna, why don't you start? Tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to have this particular specialization and do this work.
Yeah, happy to. So I always say that I grew up in rural Louisiana because that's really important to my story, and saw pretty quickly through a program in high school how different the education I was getting and my surrounding area was to the experience I had in Portland, Oregon when I was there for an art school for a few months. Shoot forward and ended up getting my MSW. I really wanted to focus not only as a clinician, but also in international social welfare with a focus on supporting individuals with trauma. I worked at a residential facility in San Francisco for a few years and then started moving into program management. And then from there moved into facilitating and doing anti-bias trainings with the Anti-Defamation League. Currently, I co-founded Soulbird Consulting with my partner, Sarah Buffy, and the focus is around helping people understand the effects of trauma and how healing happens in relationship, and also helping people understand the approach of cultural humility and exploring implicit bias and anti-racism. So the cultural humility work is what I do with Soulbird Consulting, but we primarily work with mental health professionals and organizations and people who work with a lot of different populations. So that's my background.
Thank you, Luna. Thank you for joining us. And Jazzmun, I'm going to turn to you. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Thank you for having me. My name is Jazzmun Crayton. I'm a Black trans femme, and my pronoun is genderfierce. And I came into this work through entertainment. I am an actor and a performance artist, and I started out in the clubs, dancing and performing in trans nightclubs and all over Los Angeles, actually all over the world. And I went to school a little bit for human services. And from there, I was introduced into nonprofit through a program that a dear girlfriend of mine was running called the Heart Program, which was a program specifically designed for trans women, an empowerment group. And through that group, we learned about a plethora of things, HIV and how it affects trans women. We learned a little bit about our mental health and some of the traumas that we experience on a day-to-day basis. And we were learning slowly how to support each other in that process. And through that process, I was asked if I was interested in a job. They gave me a job. I became a peer health educator, and from there, they helped develop my, my voice in community. And so, I oftentimes find myself working with the marginalized, the specific trans women who are experiencing some sort of mental trauma or homelessness or family domestic abuse. So my job has led to collaborating with different organizations and institutions to provide affirming and somewhat safe services, specifically trans. And I say that because we often get lumped up in this LGBTQ narrative, and our voices are not heard, they're not amplified, and they can't be fully supported because we haven't been able to exercise in the same sort of way our soul siblings have been able to in the other spectrums of LGBTQ spectrum. And also, I'm in a new film that I want to suggest that everyone watch. I think it's mandatory that people see it. It's called Disclosure, because it really talks about how we have been viewed viewed and that's another word I want to use, but I can't think right now. But how we've been viewed throughout history, right? And how our voices have been skewed and only shown from one particular lens. And I think it's very important that, especially on this particular panel, that everyone that's listening and take the time to look at that film. But that's me in a nutshell. And I'm still here. And my intention today is to be a voice of reason, be a voice of change, and be a voice of hope.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jazzmun. I really appreciate you joining us. And Dr. Sanchez, why don't you tell us a little bit more about you?
So I am now a 50-year-old gay man, and I am married to a male. We are raising a 12-year-old boy, and my journey began as a gay man filled with a lot of shame. And through that, I've gone through the process of my own alcohol and drug abuse, and then came out of that the other side. It wasn't until my healing happened that I discovered I couldn't continue to do the work that I was doing previously, and wanted to help and heal other people who were suffering through addiction, and also who had been struggling with with shame as individuals. And so a lot of my work has been with addiction. I've worked at AIDS Project Los Angeles. I worked at a program called LA Shanti, which is no longer around, but it was supporting gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender individuals in Los Angeles. And more recently, I've been working in addiction. So addiction treating adolescents and also treating young adults. I have a private practice, and in my private practice, I am in suburbia Los Angeles. And in that community, I do see a lot of young transgender people, and those individuals oftentimes are suffering with gender dysphoria, which is something that I think occurs a lot with transgender. And in this conversation, I would like to open that up and have just an open conversation of what do we do? How do we help and support individuals who are suffering with this? I want to also discuss the way that the LGBTQ community has had limited access to mental health services, to addiction treatment, to medical services and to education. I think minorities who are LGBTQ, as well as people of color, their access is limited in all of these areas, and the amount of support or assistance that they can get to fully realize who they are has been limited. So I think as people in the helping profession, we need to recognize this and try to support individuals in becoming their fullest potential.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sanchez. So before I hear more from you, I want to share some statistics with our listeners. These are just some quick pieces of information that I think we need to hold in our minds and in our hearts as we listen to what these three professionals have to say. LGBTQ people of color are at least twice as likely as white LGBTQ people to say that they have been personally discriminated against because they are LGBTQ when applying for jobs and when interacting with police, and 6 times more likely to say they have avoided calling the police due to concern for anti-LGBTQ discrimination compared with white LGBTQ people, which report just 5%. A study in the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development found 1 in 5 Asian and Pacific Islanders has experienced discrimination in the rental and home buying process. Rates are likely higher among LGBTQ Asian and Pacific Islander people due to lack of federal non-discrimination protections based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Black transgender people have an extremely high unemployment rate at 26%, 2 times the rate of the overall transgender sample and 4 times the rate of the general population. 41% of Black respondents said they've experienced homelessness at some point in their lives, more than 5 times the rate of the U.S. general population. And even when looking less at statistics and zooming out and just looking at culture in general, when interviewed on gay dating apps, users on things like Grindr have reported seeing phrases like "no Black, no Asian" in comments, and there have been anti-racist campaigns to tackle some of these messages of hate. This particular interview, we're going to be looking at the intersection between LGBTQ discrimination and then racism at large against all people of color. Discrimination in the United States, the experience of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer American study, which was written up in 2019, found that experiences of interpersonal discrimination were common for LGBTQ adults, including slurs at 57%, microaggressions at 53%, sexual harassment 51%, violence 51%, and harassment regarding bathroom use at 34%. More than 1 in 6 LGBTQ adults also reported avoiding healthcare due to anticipated discrimination, including 22% of transgender adults, while 16% of LGBTQ adults reported discrimination in healthcare encounters. LGBTQ racial and ethnic minorities had statistically significantly higher odds than whites in reporting discrimination based on their LGBTQ identity when applying for jobs, when trying to vote or participate in politics, and interacting with the legal system. I could keep going. I have paragraphs here. But the bottom line is we have 2 populations that are marginalized, and we're talking about when those things overlap and that's like in the real world. So I'm just going to open it up to the 3 of you who would like to start and kind of commenting on any of those statistics or sharing your thoughts.
I just want to say it's no Blacks, no fats, and no femmes as well. Yeah, because oftentimes, we don't get a chance to really talk about, how femininity is not looked upon as something to be honored and cherished in the LGBT community, and we get feminine people oftentimes get really pushed out, really marginalized, and there is no space even in the community, quote unquote, for us to to thrive, right, or to flourish. So we tend to. I often find that we find our voices because we're trying to assimilate to something that is not honoring us, has no desire to uplift us. But for some reason, I should say me personally, but I notice even, amongst the community, we're always reaching for something that's outside of us and it's not supporting us. So it's harming us. And then we wind up harming ourselves.
Yeah. I'm sitting with what Jazzmun said, and I'm thinking about just thinking about the audience that listens to this. I feel like the experiences of the LGBTQIA community are so diverse. There's so many different dynamics, even within each different population, from thinking about the trans experience, to the lesbian, to the pansexual, to the questioning asexual. It's also vastly different. And when you layer that with the experiences of being a person of color, being Black, Indigenous, Asian, all Latinx, all of that is so layered. The one thing that I always say is that you can never be culturally competent in an identity outside of your own, in an experience outside of your own. And so what I'd like to lift up is just humility. And how do we practice more humility and understanding? I may not understand all the dynamics at play, but there's an element of inquisitive and research that we all have to do, and also being able to name that there's some things that I can read, but I will not understand those dynamics. So how do you support people in that? And I just want to offer that just before we even get into the conversation, that I'm feeling overwhelmed because I myself am a queer woman. I'm married to a woman. I'm divorcing a woman. So that there's an experience even that I feel from my own experience of going through the family building process and getting halfway through the family building process and creating an embryo and trying to get support from medical professionals and mental health professionals, but there was no one who could even begin to hold space for that process, because their process of understanding was heteronormative child rearing and heteronormative aspects of creating and building a family. So I lift that up to just think about all the different dynamics at play. I shared before with you, Beth, that a lot of times when we think about LGBTQIA issues, we forget about family issues on top of that, of parenting and fertility, and all of those things can be experiences and issues and things to explore for trans folks, for LGBTQIA folks. So I just want to lift that up, that this is such a broad umbrella, and that there's so much nuance to unpack that I know I won't be able to get to, but I just want to name.
And I'm glad, Luna, you bring that up. And I think that that's an important point. Jazzmun mentioned it as well. As a society, we lump all of these things together when they're all extremely unique. And that this umbrella and a 1-hour conversation does not make somebody culturally competent. So, we can't, and I think collectively we're recognizing that term is just antiquated. What we're talking about is cultural humility and recognizing that we do not know the lived experience of another person, even if we could read a lot of books about it, even if we could go to a lot of continuing ed. and having the appreciation and the curiosity and the flexibility to be open to that. And I think what's special about the conversation we're having is we have three people coming from very different backgrounds, very different lived experiences. And it is within that diversity that this is a very phenomenon we're discussing, that you have, yes, perhaps this representative voice that's been thrust upon you by the majority community of speak for all of the gay people, speak for all of the trans people. What do all of you think? And that really what we're talking about is a lived and clinical experience of three people that are in front of me. Not, and I should note for our listeners, I can see them. This is a video, so I can see them and I can see their faces. And that you cannot speak for the entire community at large, and you can only speak for your personal perspective on it. Dr. Sanchez, I can see you there nodding. Please, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I like the idea of speaking to my own lived experience because that's what I have the most knowledge about. In my clinical work, I try to be there with the individual coming from exactly where they're at, and I try to understand it through my own experience oftentimes, and that may not be correct. And so I always have to keep an open ear to what are they saying, and does my lived experience match that, or does it not match that? And I constantly have to be open to a new suggestion or a new thought of what the person's experience may be. And I do want to say, working in insurance, which is another hat that I wear, I am also, we're responsible for finding providers for individuals. And it's challenging to find an ethnically diverse clinicians available to treat individuals who are minorities, who are LGBTQ. And I would hope that we have more clinicians joining our forces to support individuals who come from these diverse backgrounds. For myself, I felt as a gay person on this journey, suffering through shame and suffering through addiction, I felt like I could give back to a lot of people. And I wanted to be able to do that. But now in this process, when I look at LGBTQIA, I see, my experience is very limited. And I only know what it's like for a Hispanic person who's gone through different forms of discrimination and to also have family discrimination. I can understand my perspective, but I don't understand a transgender person's perspective of what their family life is like and what their cultural differences are. Or a bisexual man who might be coming from a Armenian background. That family experience is very different. I understand the rejection, but I don't understand the family dynamics that they're coming from and that cause them to be to not share themselves fully in their families or in their communities.
I would like to thank you. That's so true. But I always think, even though I may not know you, I can create space for you, right? I can welcome you in, and we can have real dialogue and conversation. And I know I won't get all the information I need in one setting, but I can keep, inviting you back so we can continue to explore. Because some of the best therapists I have have been one of my favorite therapists that I had that really, guided me to where I am now was a Jewish white lesbian woman who liked to go camping, up in Oregon somewhere. But like she listened to me and she challenged me, right? And I got a chance to explore who I was in that moment with her and find my voice through that process. So even though she might not know very much about being a Black trans, anything about being Black, being trans, identified and, navigating the world as such, right? She can still provide a space and a place where I can explore who I am in that process. And so because the door was open to me and she made provisions for me because there was no money, I could not afford to pay. So I had to go to the center. I had to go to the Gay and Lesbian Center so I could access whatever services that were available to me at that moment. So I could at least, have that short period of time, that 6 weeks, just to exercise that muscle. And then they said, look, after a period of time, you could come back and access it again. And I did that until I felt like I was, sturdy enough where I can make different moves and different, stand in a different position. But to the day, it's still needed because I'm finding, support in that arena, on a daily basis, because I'm finding that even working within the community, I get re-traumatized from folks, experiences, and they come on strong, because they're coming from, some people are literally that I'm working with are literally coming from the street, and they have their past traumas, their drug abuse, the drug use and abuse of it. Everything is showing up at the door, and they want your service, and they need your help, right? And they want to be supported and guided, and they want to live their dream. And you're like, okay, let's pick a couple of things we work at. Let's get you housed, right? Let's do the basic thing, and then we can, if we can build a trusting relationship, just a little bit, because you haven't trusted people in a long time. You probably haven't trusted nobody forever. And I'm asking you to start trusting and believing in this process, even though you've been doing it with other people. I'm asking you to do it with me. And that's where the challenge lies, is like building this trust and this relationship with the individual.
Jazzmun, you just talked and touched upon something that I want to inquire about with the three of you. What we're talking about here fundamentally is trauma. We're talking about sexual and gender trauma. We're talking about racial trauma. This is something I know the three of you have worked in extensively. And simply by your membership in these communities basically the likelihood of you avoiding it yourselves would be very, very low. Tell me what comes up for you when I talk about the word specifically for trauma, and again, the intersectionality of these two communities that are both independently marginalized, and then you basically just duplicate the trauma from one in a different way.
I'd say the thing that comes up for me first when I think about trauma is how we understand it and define it as a society. And one thing that we say is like, trauma is not just what was done to you, is what was done to you did to you. But the thing that I want to lift up around these lived identities and these lived experiences is that we may experience like individual traumas, but there's also the compounding adverse stressor of just daily being in a body or being in an identity where you're not seen as human, where you're not welcome, where you're not where you're not allowed to be yourself. And so I think so often clinicians focus on like a trauma, but there's still so much work and understanding that needs to be done in supporting people who are going through the ongoing daily trauma of just being who they are. And I understand that healing happens in relationships, but I also understand that work needs to be done to make relationships safe. So I'll just throw that out there.
Yeah, when I think of trauma, I oftentimes think of physical violence. I think of the cultural violence, the religious undertones, the religious violence that happens. And for individuals, I think being born into this culture and society, we do have our cultural unconscious that we have a lot of cultural trauma that has happened and that occurs regularly. When you're a child sitting in a church and hearing that it's wrong to have sex with another man and that you're going to go to hell for that, that has an impact. And that tells you you're not okay. And I think that there's a lot of cultural and conscious messages that we hear as young people, that we hear growing up, and the experience or the result of that trauma is an experience of shame, that idea that we are not okay as we are, that we are not as good as everybody else, that there's something defective or wrong with who we are. And I think that it's important to recognize that those cultural messages are there and they affect us, they impact us. And we not only have to fight with society about the discrimination that occurs, but we also have to fight with that cultural unconscious that those messages are just there, and we have to fight ourselves to get those, push those away, to push those out of us, and to be happy with who we are, and to not have the ability to access mental health services or medical care for individuals suffering with this type of discrimination and these types of messages. It's how is that person able to fulfill who they truly are and to reach their life's purpose without getting that help that they need? So I just think when I think of trauma, there's so many underlying messages that come at us that we have to be prepared to fight against.
I feel that anyone that is working with LGBT folks, and especially clinicians, in their office, if they're inviting people in, or if they have like a one shooter, like I think they should even ask the client, you know what trauma is? Like, do you know what trauma is and how it shows up? Because sometimes people don't know they're in a traumatic, they're in the middle of a traumatic experience. I tell my clients every day, I'm like, sleeping on the street, I mean, that's a traumatic experience. I know you want to go, here, but there's some steps to getting to, where you want to go. You've been traumatized this whole time. Just the experience of being out in the world with nowhere to go, right? And trying to, a lot of folks I'm working with are in survival mode. And even once I move them out of you're off the street, you're in this bridge housing. In the bridge housing, you got to figure out how you got to navigate with stranger, with trauma, and you're like, okay, how? And it got to a point in some of the services where they stopped helping people after they, I think it's 18 to 24. That's what they're calling you. So there's funding for that, right? The counseling, they're always creating funding, and we're helping. But just because after 24, and it appears that you should be at a certain space or a certain place in your mindset, that's not the truth of the matter. Actually, to me, it's 18 to 20, 16 to 29. Like, you're still in this mindset, like you don't really know how to navigate unless you have support, unless you have equity, some financial support, mom and dad, someone to back you, when some kind of backing. If you don't have anything backing you, it's a free for all. Like you're grabbing and pulling and holding on to like thin air because for one, you may not have the education to navigate, right? So that means you won't have access to certain jobs. You can't compete on a certain level, right? So you will have to take some basic job or do survival work, right? Whatever that looks like. Um, no education, no school. So oftentimes you won't be able to afford to live any place on your own. So you will have to access public service, right? That means general relief. Hopefully you can get in Social Security. You might not even qualify for that. And if you do qualify for that, you won't get it right away because there's a lot of strain, a lot of like red tape you have to go through. So you're like in this suffering stage and you don't even know you're suffering, you're breaking down, right? And you're still trying to stay faced. And that happens a lot in our community because we want this dream, right? That everyone else it seems attainable. But like at the end of the day, like it becomes a nightmare chasing after it, right? And we're just that's why we die young. And that's why people destroy, black trans bodies. Because for one, they don't care about them. Two, we all have the ability to be anti-black. I can't say racist, but we can definitely be anti-black. And that shows up in, you might like the culture, but you don't like the people, right? So when no one really likes you, you're like, who's working with me? Who's on my team? Then you start looking at yourself, do I really like myself? And then this defense mechanism is built up in you. And people are like, I don't know what to do. I'm bleeding for you. It's like, well, listen for a minute and let me, and give me some ideas, right? Give me some other ideas because I'm mad. I'm caught up in the middle of my trauma and I don't know what to do. You know what I tell my girls? I'm like, go get a snack, go upstairs and chill out for now. You don't have to make any decisions right now. You don't have to do nothing. But I don't want you to leave the house. I don't want you to leave today. We don't have to figure it out. I could be, enemy number one right now because you may not like what I'm having to say, but I don't want you to go. I want you to give yourself a chance, right? I think at some point we want to believe there's someone else, there's someone on our side because mom and dad threw us away. The family don't want anything to do with it. Nobody, we don't know how the system works. No one knows how to navigate, right? You hear that it's working for some people, but how's it going to work for me, right? And when it's not working, then you're just grabbing it. You're just grabbing and holding up. It's thin air. And then you get exhausted. And then weed, meth, sex, all of it starts to make sense to you because it numbs the trauma and it numbs the feeling. But you're creating new trauma that you're not familiar with.
Yeah. I just want to add to an aspect of what I heard Dr. Sanchez and Jazzmun both talk about is like how much we internalize things and how much that just builds and builds and adds on to the trauma. And I love what you said, Jazzmun. I mean, I love that you said it. I don't love the truth of it, but that anybody can be anti-Black. And you can be a Black person with anti-Black sentiment. You could be a Black person who has internalized messages that Blackness is not okay. And so you might, if the audience for this, if we're talking to mental health professionals and practitioners, I'm assuming that a majority of the people listening to this are white cis women because that's the nature of the field. And so you might find yourself thinking, well, how do I support someone who has an identity outside of me? And I might be noticing, one, you may not even notice that they're anti-Black. You might be like, yeah, that's That's a great way of thinking about things. But I hope you can notice when people have internalized negative messages around their identities. It's very hard to be that person outside of that lived experience to say, oh, no, you should love your Blackness. What you can do is connect them to other people in their community or other examples or other resources from films, right? Like Jazzmun threw out to even, I would even say influencers are people, because there are so many voices within this umbrella, within this community that are speaking to that self-love. And so I would ask everybody to look for those voices, to highlight, to share, so you have a toolkit of resources. So where you say, well, okay, I may not be a Latinx trans youth, but here's this person who's speaking to this and speaking truth to power of that. Did you hear that stuff? I like Jamila Reddy personally. They use, they identify as non-binary, Black young person who speaks a lot about self-love. And that has been very helpful for me. So even if you're not that person, or you may not feel competent or even have enough understanding to speak on that, there are people and sources and groups and communities that you can help support people to find. And so I just want to throw that out there.
Luna, as you're talking about that, it brings back something that LJ Lumpkin in our last interview had also brought up, that clinicians need to do the work in a lot of ways outside a session. But what you just pointed to, which is like, we need to connect people with resources. And if we don't have that lived experience and we're outside of that community, and even if we were necessarily within, it doesn't mean that we know everything of someone else's lived experience. We need to be willing to show up and do the work, make the calls and say, okay, how do I connect this person with other people that can lift them up and say, yes, I've been there too. And Jazzmun, I can see the look on your face. Please tell me what you're thinking as you're nodding.
Yeah, that's my gig. Like, that's why I'm here. Like, so I can hear, so I can connect, right? And say, look, this person, I believe you can work with them. I believe that if you just take the time and remain open to this process, that you can gather something that can continue on your journey. That's the only way it really works. Like, you gotta know that there's somebody that is willing to support us, right, in aspects of our lives, and willing to access that knowledge. Because we're coming to you because we're figuring you're walking an encyclopedia. You're you have these letters and this information. You have this office. Like, help me, right? Help me. But at the end of the day, it's like, I realize, like, the purpose, of the clinician is to help you help yourself, right? So, with that, I believe the clinician has to get armed with information, right? And come, like Luna was saying, with their toolbox full of information and things to, like, read this book, go to this group, try this out. And then when they come back, or if they come back, right, how did it go? Tell me what you learned. What did you hear? What stood out for you? Did you check out that movie I told you? Give them some stuff to work with, right? But that requires us to do our own work. That's what happens. Like, and that's why I come, so I can develop my voice, right? So I can have different language, different words I get to use and add to my vocabulary. I want to be with the clinicians. I want to be with the thinkers and the people that are, educated in this field to, like, help me grow. So I'm always beating up on myself or, my clients, and I can send them out in the universe, knowing that there are some people out there doing the work, because people are going to do exactly what they want to do, right? And I'm not trying to stop you from doing what you want to do, but I do want to support you in thinking and being curious about other aspects about yourself, right? I want you to think, I know you want this, but look at it like this. open your peripheral vision a little bit and see that you can actually obtain or see or do more than you limit yourself to. And that's the great thing about like where I sit in my life right now. Like I was so stuck on being this, right? And my identity was wrapped up in my art. So life and the universe took me on a journey and said, you know what? You're limiting yourself. I'm going to show you something else. But I had to go in, a different door. And because I went in a different door, I got more out of it, right? I got more, because I came into your office and I was willing to fight myself and hash it out and curse and scream and be uncomfortable in the process, right? And bring all my trauma that I was dealing with at that moment with me into your office. It got me to my next plateau. Is the trauma still there? Yes. Is some of my crazy thinking still there? Yes. But I don't act on it the same way. I believe people always say, I'm telling you the truth. Well, I say, look, your truth is evolving because what might have worked for you a couple of years ago may not be the same thing that's working for you today. And people are like, oh, okay, maybe. I was like, just stay with the maybe and we'll see where we can go from here. Just be open to the possibility of something new and different about you in this situation. And then we'll talk about it later. We'll see where you are later. But stick around for yourself.
Dr. Sanchez, I can see you nodding. As Jazzmun was talking, what were you thinking about?
Well, I think Jazzmun is spot on in a lot of what she's talking about. I think that our clients, if they can come back to us again and again, then their minds begin to open, and they can begin to experience real change, and they can begin to acknowledge what is really at the crux of what the issues are. And through that, they begin to develop tools. And Luna had also mentioned that you have to educate yourself. You have to learn more, want to understand more. And I think as a clinician, one thing that people get with getting services from a therapist is you get the years of education and knowledge that comes with being a clinician. And so as a clinician, the more that you can continue to develop and expand your toolbox, the better that you're going to be for the clients that you're serving. And as we do that, we're able to give our clients more tools. They get more tools to use because our toolbox is expanded. And when we're giving them tools, we've all been in situations where, or I don't know, from personal experience, myself being in therapy, I've been in therapy with people who it feels like this is their paycheck. And then I've been with clinicians who they care about me and they're on this journey and on this path with me. And I want to be the clinician that I'm on the journey and on the path with my clients. They aren't just a paycheck. I want to be with them in their healing. And I want to give them and support them in creating a toolbox that's going to work for them for years to come. So yeah, I do think it's vitally important that we keep educating ourselves and keep expanding and growing as clinicians so that we have more to offer to those individuals who need our help.
And there's a desirability thing that needs to continue to grow in mental health. Like, because people don't want to think of themselves needing anything outside of like a fierce, look or a cute party or whatever. Like, a lot of times people do not want to think about like there's something wrong. I hate to use the word wrong, but like other things need to be explored, right? Because some things have been put in these little bags, like Erica say, bag lady, and you just been carrying them with you this whole time but not opening those bags and not looking and dissecting and touching that stuff again. I even have things in my apartment like, when am I going to go through that box and get rid of that stuff? I have not used it in a long time, but I don't know why I think that it's going to work for me today when we don't even use those. That's why I don't have the earphones anymore, because I believe I threw them away. Because I knew I didn't need them anymore, but here I needed them today. So I got to figure out, I got to work on that. You know what I'm saying? But it's that whole thing of mental health being desirable to the people. Like, wanting, I don't know if it's in the promotion of it or how, I noticed that a lot more celebrities and people that people admire and influencers are talking about, their engaging mental health. We had a program at my agency last month for Mental Health Awareness Month, where we invited influencers and celebrities. Specifically, we were asking those folks of color, right? Like API, African American. Laverne did it for us, Laverne Cox. Margaret Cho did it. Kelly Hugh, Lee Shane, like a lot of people outside of our, our Caucasian, brothers and sisters. We asked people of color to talk about their experience, how they're interacting with their mental health, who are they, having conversation with? Are they in therapy? How do they feel about therapy? Do you recommend it? How do you access people that are culturally sensitive to what your needs and what you're desiring, from therapy? It's like how do we keep making that look attractive to people wanting to engage in mental health? That comes up.
One of the things that all three of you have touched upon in different ways is the lack of trust. And we could spend hours just talking about that. But that we're looking at systems that have been in place that have kept white people in power and that have kept cisgender and straight people in a position of comfort. And we talked a lot about that in our last podcast. But this idea that there's a lack of trust. Like, we know that people who have trauma are going to be suspicious of other people because they've learned not to trust. They've been taught through years of experience, either with their caregivers or with coaches, teachers, bosses, loved ones, friends, whoever, that people can't be trusted. And then here we are as mental health professionals saying, hey, come into my office and trust me, open up to me. And that while it can be a hurdle to get through if we're cisgender and the other person is not, if we're straight and the other person is not, if we're white and the other person is not, the research also shows that that's not irrecoverable, but it requires for us as the dominant representatives of the dominant culture to be dissecting our contribution in the room and how our dominant conditioning can play out. That yes, Jazzmun, I think it is part of, how do we make this more attractive? And for each of us as clinicians, how do each of us connect with our dominant identities and acknowledge the limitations that we have because of that conditioning?
Yes, I'm jumping out of my seat to to comment on this, because I think one thing to add to what you said, Beth, so beautifully, I hope everyone listens to that again, because I think when you don't understand your own the resources you have within your own dominant identities and how you might be perpetuating that, if you even think, I'm going to approach this person or this client with a neutral is already unsafe. You have to be actively affirming and finding ways to actively affirming. If you're neutral, that reads as unsafe, because the dominant neutral, quote unquote, the dominant culture is unsafe. So you have to go out of your way to activate that. And I just think that there are levels of where someone feels safety, and even thinking about trust. I think, my brother told me one time that trust is earned. Trust is earned. So it's just, instead of being like, why aren't they trusting me? It's like, how do you build and earn that trust over time, and realize that you can't approach it in the same way that you would approach a client who has dominant identities. You have to go out of your way. So when I'm talking about affirming, how do you signal safety? What's your signage? What's your are you sharing your pronouns? Are there signs that affirm that in your office? Are you signaling safety in all of these different ways that we can signal safety? Are you sharing reading? Are you exploring the fact that, hey, I want to just acknowledge that we are two different lived experiences? That alone right there would signal safety to me. So I just want to throw that out as like all the different ways that you can signal safety and how important it is to do so.
Dr. Sanchez, you looked like you had something you wanted to say. I could see the wheels turning.
Yeah, I'm just in question or questioning my own practices. How do I signal safety to clients? What do I do to show them that this is a safe environment? And I think for me, it's really letting the client be who they are, and not putting expectations on them that they need to talk more, or that they need to be different, or share their deepest, innermost thoughts with me. That will come in time, and I have to be patient, and I have to be on the client's schedule to allow them to open up and to really be there for me. And I love what Luna was saying, in that, there could be other ways that I could create more safety, and acknowledging our differences would be a way to create more safety. So I think we can all learn from each other what works, and how to be better, how to always be better clinicians, and how to connect better to people.
Thank you for that reflection, Frank. And that's something I've heard consistently in these conversations, is the importance of all of us taking that time to step back and do that reflection. And LaShonda Sugg, who I interviewed last week, said it really well, that our tendency is to want to push it down because it's uncomfortable, where it's like, oh, I don't want to confront that thing about me, like that, the way I move in the world and how I do this thing, that's conditioned, and that's society that's allowed me basically to do that, and how it's hurtful to others. And so we push it down. And that in order for us to be changing this, every single one of us needs to have a really long, hard look in the mirror again and again and again. And that comes back to that whole concept, Luna, that you brought up, the difference between cultural competence and cultural humility. We could spend so much more time talking about this. I am honored to have had even this time with the three of you to share your personal and professional experiences of what it means to be a person of color who is also part of the LGBTQIA community. I would like to invite you, please tell us how folks can get in touch with you. What is your website? What is your email address? LinkedIn, things like that. Why don't we start with you, Jazzmun? If people want to learn more about you and learn more about your work, how can they get in touch with you?
Oh, yeah, please. I am at Jazzmun, Jazzmun, the letter C, at apaitonline.org.
Thank you, Jazzmun. And how about for you, Luna?
Yeah, if you want to find out more about me and the work that I do, you can go to soulbirdconsulting.info. That's soul, SOUL, and then bird, BIRD, and then consulting, and that's LLC.info. So just look it up, look for Souls and Birds and Luna. Thank you.
Thank you, Luna. And Dr. Sanchez, for people who want to get in touch with you, learn more about you.
Sure. If you'd like to get in touch with me, my web address is drfranksanchez.com. And I can be reached at Frank Sanchez, LMFT, licensed marriage and family therapist, at gmail.com.
Wonderful. Thank you to the three of you. I think these moments are opportunities for all of us to hear from different perspectives, and it can only serve to make us better as clinicians and better as humans. So thank you for taking this time with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've just finished listening to another exclusive Continuing Ed podcast by Clearly Clinical. If you like what you just heard and you need Continuing Ed credits, please visit us at clearlyclinical.com to check out our one-year membership, where you'll have access to our growing library of Continuing Ed podcast courses. Clearly Clinical, where our goal is to help you learn, grow, and shine.